that what I'm going to give you is pure gold. And when I say that, I know there's going to be a number of people who are going to listen to this and their first thought's going to be, who cares? Why do I need this? But you do need this because everybody faces problems. And especially if you're in ministry, you're going to face those difficulties, and you need a way to get through those difficulties in a minimum of time, but with careful thinking so that you don't unwisely move forward and miss the opportunities that are in those problems that are there.
This is Master Ministry, tips, tools, and truths to advance eternal effectiveness in ministry. I'm your host, Douglas Hammett. Let's move into the broadcast now.
Have you ever faced a major problem? Laid awake at night trying to just figure out, where do I start? What do I do first? How do I tackle this issue? Where am I going to go? How am I going to solve this? And then found yourself maybe, depending on the issue itself, maybe sometimes for days working on that very issue. I've been there. Been there so many, many times. And I began to find myself in the early years of my ministry facing problems over and over again. First, I had to adjust to the fact that I didn't think problems would ever happen. I guess maybe in my naive thinking at that time, I thought, boy, problems will never come my way. Well, I eventually adjusted and realized, boy, problems are always going to come my way. I just as well get ready for them. And so I began to try to jot down different ways that I would approach problems, and over time I began to recognize that there was a pattern to some of the ways that I was dealing with issues. There were patterns in the way that I could approach them, ways that I found solutions and answers and so on. And so what I eventually did was begin to put those into more of a form that would help me approach systematically the problems that came my way. That's what the Goliath Method is really all about. I want to talk to you about facing your Goliath today. And what I ended up doing was, after I took those patterns of how to approach problems and realized that there were several different ways of approaching problems that could help break me out of my limited thinking, the way that I was approaching things, I began to categorize them, and then I brought them to the story of David and Goliath. And of course, everybody's familiar with that story, how David, as a young man, came upon the situation of Goliath challenging all of Israel, and the Israelite soldiers sitting on the hillside, petrified and afraid to move forward, and David ultimately going out into battle and fighting with Goliath, and Goliath, of course, laughing at him, and David takes Goliath down, and the Philistine army is routed, and David becomes the hero in the story. Now, in all of that, I then built myself a system which I've taught to others, a system that I've seen work in so many different ways, in so many different kinds of problems. Things, for instance, issues that people would deal with in, should I buy this house or should I not? Should I take this job or should I not? Should I try this endeavor or should I not? To ministry problems, dealing with issues where maybe it was a matter of reaching more people, or maybe it was a financial matter within the church that we were trying to deal with, or maybe it was some kind of a dilemma where we had different groups in the church pitted against each other, and how are we going to solve this particular problem? To health issues. I've seen people with major health issues use this Goliath method to sort the system out, sort the issues out, and come up with, through this system, come up with some answers that help them move forward instead of set idly by, paralyzed, wishing there was something they could do, but afraid to move forward, thinking, boy, I'm going to miss something here. Now, let me say kind of as a caveat here, that what I'm going to give you is pure gold. And when I say that, I know there's going to be a number of people who are going to listen to this, and their first thought's going to be, who cares? Why do I need this? but you do need this because everybody faces problems. And especially if you're in ministry, you're going to face those difficulties, and you need a way to get through those difficulties in a minimum of time, but with careful thinking so that you don't unwisely move forward and miss the opportunities that are in those problems that are there. Now, I'm not going to tell you that the Goliath method is a foolproof system or that it's going to cover every base for you. What I'm going to tell you it will do is it will help you become far more creative. Now, here we go. I've had so many people tell me this. Oh no, Brother Hammett, I'm not creative. I could never be creative. Well, right there, you've kind of signed your own death warrant. You need to be creative. And, good news, you can be creative. You don't have to sit there and say, I'm just not creative. I mean, you honestly can become creative. The key to creativity is not some innate thing that you're born with. The key to creativity is asking good questions. Asking good questions regarding the issue that you're facing and coming up with good answers. So that's what I'm going to give you today, are some areas that you can begin to ask these questions about that'll help you take your problem to a new level in solution-oriented thinking instead of problem-oriented thinking. And so, without any further ado, here's where we're going to head today. Let's get ourselves over here and let's see here if I can get this thing to move for me. All right. Whoa, there we go. All right. There we go. All right. Okay. Here we are. Now, the G in Goliath, as David stood there facing his problem, he had to assess the goals that were involved. Obviously, there was a goal that David had. David's goal was that God would be glorified. The king, Saul, had a goal, and it seems that Saul's goal was that somebody else would go out and fight besides him. Everybody seemed to be looking to him. The soldier's goal, the Israelite soldier's goal was, let's just stay alive and hope somebody else volunteers. But we're going to be very envious if somebody goes out and wins this battle. And then, of course, there's the goal of Goliath himself. And his goal is to show that Jehovah God is a false god and the Philistine gods are more powerful. And the Philistines' goal is to let Goliath fight you just go right on down the line. Everybody has a goal. And we need to get down to it, and we need to really come down and really examine our own goals in every situation. And when we're facing a problem, maybe it's a person problem, we're having trouble with another person in a relationship, we need to be asking, what is their goal? What is it that they're really after? Not what they should really be after, but what are they really after? And we need to ask the same of ourselves. What am I really after? What is the bottom line of what I want right now? And be brutally honest with ourselves. I know what we ought to have, and our eyes ought to be on God, but they aren't all the time. And we need to be honest about that if we're going to make an adjustment in our own heart and in our own goals and set those goals where God wants them to be. And so we start with the goals. And we begin to ask those questions and we examine them carefully, and maybe what we need to do is change our goals in order to be able to get the problem resolved. It could be that we've got to change the goals of the other person, but that's going to be pretty much impossible to do. But we could be asking ourselves, is there any way I could help that person get what they want and still get the end goal that I'm after? Now, in this case, obviously, David couldn't do a thing about changing Goliath's goal. His goal was the defeat of the Israelite army, the humiliation of Jehovah God, and David wasn't about to put up with that. There was no room for compromise for him in this particular situation. So we move to our second question, and that is opposites. We start to ask ourselves about opposites. What are the opposites here? Well, obviously, the goals are in complete opposition to one another. David's goal and Goliath's goal. And so they're in absolute opposition. But there's also other opposites that are going on in this story. There's the opposites of, there's one man on the field that's willing to fight, and he's saying one man can come down and fight him. One question I've asked is, why didn't just the whole Israelite army go down there and beat the fire out of the guy and rout the Philistines? It seems to me rather likely that the Philistines on the other side were an army of about the same size as the Israelites, about the same power, and there's just one man that's down in the middle of the valley who's saying, I'm the guy who's going to stand up and fight you guys. Now, send somebody in here. Well, who said that he had to make the rules? And someone could have come up with another plan here. But instead, they were looking for a champion, someone to go down and fight the battle. And in this case, we've got a big guy against a little guy. Complete opposites. We see the armor issue. David doesn't wear any armor. David doesn't go down with weapons of war. Instead, he goes down with his slingshot and 5 smooth stones. And Goliath comes out with his weapons of war and, of course, his armor bearer that goes before him and all the rest. And so the opposites that are here. And sometimes we need to do some opposite thinking. That's what David did. David was told by the king Saul that he needed to put on the armor. And so David tried to put the armor on, but he couldn't wear it. So he began to think opposite. What else could I do? Well, I could use the slingshot. He's used it before. He's been effective with it before. There's not time to train with a sword, but there is time to take out that slingshot that he's used many times before and won battles with wild animals. And what's he facing on the battlefield? A giant that's so big it's going to be pretty hard to miss him with that slingshot. And so he could be thinking in opposites, if you will. And many times that'll be the case with us. And then we go to the L. We go to the limits. What are the limits? What are the things that we have assumed are the limitations here? The children of Israel, the Israelite army that's here, their limitation is nobody's as big as Goliath. He's just too big. He limits us, and we can't face him. David didn't think that way. David was thinking how big his God was instead of how big he was. David was not thinking about how big his slingshot was. He was thinking about how his God could guide his stone right to the direct place that it needed to go. And one stone, and that giant was on the ground and gone. David chopped his head off. The limits, we need to stop and ask ourselves, what are the things that are limiting me? What have I decided in this situation that I can't do? What am I assuming I can't do? And assume for a moment, and as you begin to approach your problems, assume for a moment, what would happen if I remove the limits in my thinking? What if I decided that the limitations that I'm telling myself, this can't be, everybody else is telling me you can't do it that way, what would happen if those limits were removed and instead I moved forward for God? I remember one time when our church at Lehigh Valley was facing a major financial problems with our Christian school. We were just going in the hole year after year. It was getting so bad. And I came to the church with some strange ideas, and this is where it was born out of, was really the limit issue. And it was, well, we can't raise tuition a whole lot more. We're not going to be able to do that. We can't get a lot more students unless we change our enrollment and have an open enrollment and allow kids in from the community who maybe are troubled kids or whatever else. I mean, there were certainly ways that we could have done that. But what we ended up doing was really a challenging of the limits and an opposite kind of thinking. I proposed to the church that what we would do is, instead of charging for our Christian school, we were going to go tuition free. We were going to remove the limits, and then we were going to ask the whole church to be a part of helping to educate these children that our families were putting in there. And so some of our older members who didn't have children anymore in school, they began to contribute and to give because they saw that they were investing in the youth of our church as they were growing up. And God solved our financial problems this way. Now, I'll be quite honest with you. I didn't know it was going to work well. And I went in with fear and trepidation, and I told the folks, look, I'm not telling you this will work. I'm telling you I believe this is what the Lord wants us to do. I'm going to ask you to trust me, and let's make it an experiment for a year. Well, here we are, I don't know how many years later now. I don't even remember the year that all took place. It's been so long ago. And our church is still tuition free, and same reason here, and God supplies the needs of our church and of our school now. And so it was all born out of this kind of thinking, if you will. Then the I in Goliath is the information. What information do I have? What information do I not have? What information could I get if I went, and we've been talking about getting counsel, and what if I went to someone else? What information could they maybe give me? What information could be gotten from me that would help me be able to handle this problem in a more forthright manner? And it might be that with that information, I could know what I need and be able to make a wise decision going forward. For instance, it's not unusual for people to go to a doctor and the doctor gives them some name of a disease that they think they might have, and they go home and they get on the internet and hop on the internet, and oh my soul, before they know it, they're just about ready to go commit suicide. And what's the problem? Well, they don't have all the information yet. They aren't sure that they have that problem. They aren't sure that they have that disease. It's just the doctor mentioned it as one of several possibilities. Now, if you're like me, I'd go home and Google it too. I'd be looking to see what's that mean and what's it going to be like and how do I know? But if I'm not careful, I'll start imagining that I've got all those symptoms, and I'll have myself already 2 feet in the grave, and one hand out is all, and all because I don't have all the information. Let's make sure we get all the information before we go drawing conclusions. And so we're asking ourselves what information could be helpful to resolve this particular problem. Then we go to the alliances. What about alliances? What if I went to someone else who could help me with this? Is there someone else who could help solve this problem? I don't know how many times in situations with church people that maybe someone would get sideways with someone else. I'd begin asking myself, okay, how can we help resolve this particular problem? And I'd realize I was not, although I was the pastor, I was not the person that was closest to the person that needed to make the first move in solving this problem. But if I could go to someone who I was close to, who was close to that person could go and influence them and help them begin to see things in a proper way. Just because you're in a position of authority doesn't mean that the people under you that you're trying to deal with really trust you. That doesn't happen. In fact, people in authority are often distrusted simply because of that. And so there are times when alliances are needed, and you can get others that can help you. And this is one of the reasons that I think there's great wisdom in Acts chapter 6. I believe those men that were there were deacons. It's wise to have godly men as deacons who will come alongside and help in situations where there's problems within the between people in a church, and maybe one of those deacons could be of great help in sitting down with one of those people or both of those people and help resolve the problem that's there. What about alliances? And there are times when I've seen problems, let's take some kind of a physical problem, a problem where I had trouble in a car, a vehicle that I owned, and I'd go to see someone who I knew specialized in that. They were in the church, and I knew that they could help me, and I'd go and talk to them, and I'd get their help and their perspective, and they'd be able to bail me out, if you will. Not necessarily that they did the work or gave anything to me for free, but that they could give me some advice and some direction on what's the best thing to be able to do with that vehicle to get it into workable shape again. And so the alliances become very powerful. Then there's the timing. What about the timing of this particular situation? Is there a way in which I could delay the decision? And there have been times when I've delayed decisions that I was working on, and I knew that those particular things needed to be resolved. But at the same time, to march in too quickly and try to fix them would have caused the problem to get worse than what it already was. And so there were times when it was better to let things lie, and the rest of the information, here we're back to information, the rest of the information would come out and wise choices could be made. I remember in one particular section of my ministry, I had a man working for me who was, he was there before I got there, and he was basically Well, he was just a snake. I guess that's the best way to put it. And he would come in and he would tell me of some problem, only he'd only tell me part of the information. And he'd demand that I make a decision right then and there. And I determined well into this thing that I wasn't going to make quick snap decisions when I didn't have all the information, and I knew I couldn't trust this man to tell me the truth. So I would tell him, look, I'll pray about it and get back to you by tomorrow. But timing would often play into that, and that very night I'd get a call from maybe one of the families in the church, one of the men, and he'd say, Pastor, do you know about this problem? Yeah, I've heard about it. Tell me about it. And he'd fill me in on the other side of the details, and by the next morning I knew the truth of the situation, and I'd be able to make some decisions that didn't end up getting me in hot water. Well, thankfully, that particular staff member moved on in about 5 to 6 months and got on out of there, and he was a danger to the ministry, and certainly had a second side to everything. So there's times when timing, it's best to wait. But there's also times when timing would tell you the best thing to do is move very quickly and get it settled and resolved and move forward. And so we need to be very careful about our timing. But think about your timing. Is there a way I could postpone this, and how would it impact the situation? Is there a way I could move quicker on this, and how would that impact the situation? And by asking these questions, we can begin brainstorming and coming up with wise choices on the problems that we may face. And then, of course, there's the heart issue. Now think about the heart, if you will. As David looked at the heart, David's heart, he knew where his heart was. It was clear to see where Saul's heart was. It was clear to see where Eliab's heart, David's oldest brother, where his heart was at. It wasn't with the things of God or with David. It was more with jealousy. And there's times when you look at the heart of a person who's criticizing you and you realize they really don't have your best interest at heart, and they're not about to tell you the truth. And so those things need to be discounted because of the heart in the situation. You could look at Goliath's issue, and you could see that there's no reasoning with this man, Goliath. The only answer for Goliath is going to be, real simply, to take Goliath out. This thing has got to be solved. Now, having said all this, what I've just given you is what I call the Goliath Method. Now, I could go on with further training with this. In fact, I've got a training series that I do with this, a setup that I've done, and if you'd be interested in that training, just drop me an email. I'll be glad to talk with you about it and let you know how you can get that. It's not very expensive, just a few dollars or so. But I'd be glad to give you that, and it walks through this in some more illustrative material to help you understand how to use it. Now, I'm not saying that using the Goliath Method will help you think of everything. I am saying it will prime the pump, so to speak, and cause you to start thinking in ways that you will think of most of the things. And if you're in a situation where, number one, you're maybe not getting counsel from someone on this particular decision, this will help you counsel yourself in a much wiser way. If you're in a situation where you're counseling somebody else using this particular system, and in ministry we do this all the time, we're trying to help people make wise decisions. Using this particular system, this method, the Goliath Method, will help you help them think through the situation carefully and strategically. And so I highly recommend the Goliath Method. It's not the only answer, and I think coupled, though, with the Philippians 4:8 method that I talked with you about last week, you're going to find yourself able to give very wise counsel with just those two things. And if you get help from other people, as you listen to them, you're going to hear them not necessarily using this system, but you will hear them as they are counseling you and giving you perspective, and you'll be able to realize what areas you need to challenge, what areas you need to think more about, and be able to give it more attention moving forward. Well, I pray this will be a real help for you, not only in your own decisions, but in turn helping others in making their decisions wise as well. God bless you in your ministry as you take it forward for the Lord Jesus Christ.
Thanks for listening. You know your ministry does not have to stagnate or die. If you want to get out of the box and into the book, get some help right now. Give me a shout at pdhammett@gmail.com. We'll discuss what you need and recommend a course of action. get in touch with me. You can also find tips, tools, and truths to advance eternal effectiveness in ministry and make an eternal impact at masterministry.com. Thanks for listening. Now let's go make a difference.